Hey guys, welcome to the Fridays podcast. Today I want to spend a few minutes on talking about what is specifically important for us engineers because we are very often focused too much on tools, and I want to show you what helped me a lot in my work on what to focus on, what is important, because the actual technology is second, and there are two main things that you need to watch out for and think about when building a platform, while building pipelines, when doing data engineering. So for this, if you're watching this on YouTube, I'm going to bring up this list then in a second. If you're on the podcast, don't worry, I'm going to explain this to you. Now, the important part that we all need to understand is that the technology is not the driver of what we're doing. We're very often treating it as such. There's a cool new tool, we need to use this tool. Everybody needs to use tool X because it's super cool and it promises us a lot. But the two things you need to look out for and need to think about is what's the source and what's my data looking like, and what goals do I have, what is the end product, or what should the end product look like. So these are the two main things. Now, I'm going to bring this up here, the sheet. This is not a complete list. This is not a finished product to say. This is just what I had from the top of my head, what I wrote down, because I was thinking about adding this to a new course in the Data Engineering Academy. But I want to share this with you today on the podcast because I think this will already help you a lot. So first, let's talk about the source. You need to look into, understand what is the source, understand the device, if this is an IoT, an Internet of Things application, right? Where are you getting the data from? What is delivering you the data? This is something that is very important. Then think about, if it's devices, think about scaling of these sources, or what data is going to be expected, because it is important to outlook not just what is happening today, what is going to happen in a week, in a month, in a year, in 5 years, because this can already drive you towards the right direction. It's super important. So think about that. And then for us engineers, how much data has a single transmission or a single package? And if you think about APIs, you get some data from APIs, from an API. How large is this data? You get data from a device. How large is this data? This is something, a single transmission, very important. Then you are going to think about, once you understand this, scale this up. Not just a single transmission. How much data is this per day? You could also think about it as smaller increments, per second, per minute, per hour, per day. So you get a feeling of, how is the growth over time? And how fast do you need to process that data? Then you will get closer down or narrow this more down. What is the type of the data, right? Understand the content of the data. The type, is this a CSV? Is this a JSON? Is this a XML? Is this a YAML file or a video or a PDF? It doesn't matter. Think about this and then understand, what is actually in that data? This is where you very often as an engineer need domain knowledge, or you need to get someone with domain knowledge who understands the data and who can explain this to you. Now, the next point I already mentioned, how fast is the data coming in, messages per minute. This is a bit of, it's how much getting posted per day. How fast is the data coming in? This is something very important. Also, when you look and think about the data, it's not the same the whole day. Right? If you think about an online store, most likely during lunch breaks and after office hours of people, it's going to rise up, or in the evening. So are there actually peaks for the incoming data, peaks of the transactions, peaks when people create data? Very important, because you need to scale the systems right so that you actually can scale these peaks and not get basically DDoSed whenever these peaks are coming, whenever a lot of people are active. Whenever they're active, that fits to also, is their data arriving late? right? Very often when you think of an IoT device, very often these devices, if they're out there, if they're on the road, they don't have access to the internet all the time. So might be that the data is arriving late, or that the transmission is made in a way that it's either way going to transmit the data only every hour or every day. So think about this. Could it be that data is stuck somewhere and it's arriving late? Or if you're thinking about an API, you get data from, let's say, Spotify API. I don't know this, but let's make this example up. You get the data from an API. Is the API delivering you data that is live, or is this older data? Is this data from an hour ago, from yesterday, or from a minute ago? This is very often super important. Now, we're already getting into the actual processing. You see, we understand the data. What's the source like? How fast is this coming? How much is coming? Is this data coming late? And then you think about, okay, what processing guarantees do I need? Because this is very different depending on your application, right? If it's credit card data, you most likely want to have the guarantee that it's processed exactly once, right? You want to have that transaction exactly once. If this is, let's say, weather data, you could say at least once is okay. You get the hourly data once. If you process it again, doesn't matter. It's just going to override it. Sometimes it's important that it's at most once, so it's 0 or 1 and not 2 or 3 times. So these are the things you already need to understand. Okay, then you have a feeling of what do I actually need to develop, in which direction is this going. I actually added more points to how's the data arriving, right? So is there an API where you will get the data from, or where you will request the data from? Is the data being dropped, for instance, into a bucket from somewhere else where you don't have access to it? How's the authentication done to get the data? Do you need to extract the data from the source, right? Do you need to extract the data from the API? Or are you going to host an API and somebody's going to send the data to you? This makes a difference, right? So how many sources, like if you need to extract the data from the source, how many sources are there? Will the sources get implemented individually by someone else? How's that going to work? Well, what exactly are the sources? We talked about that. What's the schema of these? I think we already talked about this. Will their credentials be needed? Is there an API? I think, yeah, that's already good. Yeah, with every transmission, there is metadata. So you want to store that metadata somewhere, right? Is the metadata already stored somewhere? Do you need to store this? This is something that is very important to think about. And we're going to get to that later as well. Is there a retention period or a downsampling needed? Well, let's get to that in a sec. So retention period, downsampling, we're going to talk about this in a second. So that's a lot of questions that you need to ask yourself to understand the source, right? Understand the source. Where's the data coming from? How's the data looking? How fast is it coming in? And so on. Now, then you need to ask questions about the goals, right? What are the goals? What is the destination going to look like, right? Think about what kind of use case is this? Is this an analytics use case where you're analyzing the data for optimization, for business intelligence, for basically improving the systems, improving the business? Very often people are, let's say, doing simple BI, business intelligence on this. Do people want to look at the data on a dashboard? Or is there going to be machine learning running or some algorithms running in the background that actually then process the data and do machine learning with it and then create the results? So analytics. Is this transactional processing and visualization? So very often this is the main use case, transactional processing. When you think of an online store, again, think of Amazon. Analytics will be something that you don't know, but they will use the data internally to make Amazon better. Transactional processing, this is something that you experience when you buy something. Your purchase is going to be a transaction, and this transaction is going to be processed by Amazon so that the goods will get to you. So think about that. Now, what does this usually have? Transactional usually you need to think about user interfaces. What's going to be on the user interface? What data is the user going to see? Are there going to be APIs that need to be hosted? This kind of stuff, because for apps, right? These kind of things, you need to think of, okay, this is the destination going to be. How's the data going to be visualized? When a lot of times when you think about IoT data, people want to see the raw data. When they want to see the raw data, how much data do they want to see at once? Do they want to see cold data, like older data, a year ago, 2 years ago? How often is that cold data queried? And these kind of things you need to think of, right? How much data at once? What's the fresh and cold data rate? You could also think of like how fast do the results need to appear? That's for raw data. Let's say aggregated data. Then you need to understand, okay, is there going to be aggregated data? How is the data going to be aggregated? When's the data going to be aggregated? Is the data going to be aggregated and analyzed on a query when somebody queries the data? Or is this going to be done on a schedule? Like every night, the data is going to be aggregated for the last day. It's something very traditional. A lot of people do this. Is the data going to be aggregated while this is streaming in? So before actually somebody queries the data, is there going to be analytics running and going to aggregate the data? So these kind of things, you need to look at how's the data going to be visualized, raw data or aggregated data, and then how is this required. Processing time requirements. These are also important. People need to have the results. How fast do the results need to be there? Is this report going to be created once every hour and then you have basically an hour to create the next report? Or is this a live overview or live view so that the data needs to be there instantly? Important. Also, I put here availability of analytics output, input versus output delay. Basically, this is the time when the data arrives until the time the output gets generated. So how fast is the data? Does the data need to flow through the whole system? Right? And I was already talking to this before. How fresh does the data need to be for this? How fresh does the data need to be for these reports, for these views? How often is the data queried? Every day, every hour, every minute? I think I missed here how much data is going to be queried. It's going to be queried at once. You see, this already relates to what we talked before with the source. What's the data retention time? Do you want to keep all the data or only aggregated data? For basically, very often you can't store all the data, or you don't want to store all the data because it's so much data. So what people do is they set a retention time for a week, a month, a year, and then they aggregate the data to not have basically, for instance, millisecond or microsecond values when you think of measurements, but have then only minute values, for instance, right? Because it doesn't make sense for the weather data to have it in a normal application every second, only every minute or every hour works fine. So think about the retention. Understand what retention time is required, is needed. Also things like who's working on the platform. That is also something very important, like who is using that data? Are these analysts? Are they scientists? Is this a normal user? Who's your customer? Who's the client, basically, for this? And if there's already an understanding of which tools are used to query the data, then that is also something to ask for. Like if you're not starting on a green field, if there is already something, which tools are used to query the data? I think these are important things. So also other topics here, I wrote down general topics, security requirements, identity and access management requirements, laws, GDPR, abiding to laws. I think these are some very important things. But what was missing from all of this, and I mentioned this in the beginning, technology, the tools. It's completely missing from this. Doesn't make sense to look at the tools in the beginning. Only look at this after you understand the source and understand the goals of what people are going to do. How's the data going to be used? Then there's the actual planning of the pipelines, of the platform, of which tools to use where, that's coming later. Focus on these 2 points. You will become a lot better at engineering, a lot more efficient. Of course, I'm also very interested in learning new tools, trying to implement new tools. We engineers, we are usually a curious bunch. So I think it's good for us to keep fresh, keep adding new knowledge to our brain, let's say. But for starting a new project, for doing data engineering, the important thing is that you think about the technology later, think about what's my data and the source looking like, and what's the destination, what's the goal, who's going to use this. And then everything in the middle will come automatically. So I hope this helps. Let me know what's missing in the comments on YouTube. What should I look into as well? What have you experienced in this process? Or are you just completely tool driven? Yeah. If you're listening to this on Friday, when this comes out, I wish you a great weekend. Enjoy your weekend, enjoy your time. And otherwise, just have a great day. And we meet in the next podcast on Monday then. See ya.